The first two questions are 1-mark questions, so multiple choice, hopefully nice and simple. Which one of the following states the reason for the use of PAR-Q? So it's A, to assess personal readiness for exercise. So PAR-Q is a physical activity readiness questionnaire, so it's A. And the second question, which one of the following is a soft tissue injury? That would be tennis elbow. So tennis elbow and golfer's elbow are both soft tissue injuries. The next question's a little bit trickier, and this links in with the first topic that you've studied, which was the skeletal system. Protection is a function of the skeletal system. Explain using one example how the skeletal system's protective function aids performance in physical activity and sport. So hopefully if we think back to that first topic, one of the functions of the skeletal system is protection, and we have to link that to flat bones. So for the first mark, we could say something along the lines of flat bones help to protect the organs of the body. We then need to give an example from sport. So a good example for this is probably the sport of rugby, because it's a contact sport and lots of injuries can occur. So for example, during a rugby tackle, the cranium protects the brain. So you've given an example of a sport, a specific action within that sport, the rugby tackle, and an example of a bone of the body and what it protects. For the final mark then, we need to link to performance, and we can also link to the type of injury. So for the final mark, you could say this will prevent a concussion occurring, meaning that the player can continue with the match. So if you put something along those lines where you've talked about flat bones, you've given an example of the injury that's being prevented, then you're on the right lines to get those marks. It states, given an example for each, 2 different methods used to reduce the risk of injury during a boxing match. So you can pick any of the 5 methods of prevention, but try to, as usual, think of the most obvious that you can relate to boxing. So you get 1 mark for the method and 1 mark for an example for boxing. So for example, you could say protective equipment, use of protective equipment for 1 mark, and then give an example of, you could say the boxing gloves can prevent a fracture to the hand, gum shield helps to protect the teeth, or there's also in some forms of boxing, there's also a helmet which can help to prevent concussion. So if you put any of those examples, that's going to be your 2nd mark. You could say, as another method, you could say checking equipment and the facilities. For example, the match referee should check the condition of the gloves that the players are wearing to check that they're not sharp in any way. Should also check the surface of the ring, that it's not slippy, so a boxer doesn't fall over, which can cause an injury. You could also perhaps talk about the application of the rules as a method as well. For example, there's a rule in boxing that if you perform a low blow, then it's punished with a points deduction. So that could be another example in order to get your 2 marks. The next question is about warming up. Warm-ups are an important part of preparing for activity. Complete the table by stating 2 phases of a warm-up, how each phase helps a performer prepare for their activity. So the first phase of a warm-up is the cardiovascular stage. How does this phase help you prepare for an activity? Or you start to get oxygenated blood to your muscles during that warm-up. So when you start the event, the muscles are already being supplied with the energy that they need. The second phase of the warm-up is stretching. And the way this helps performance in your activity is that your muscles are then ready to stretch to their maximum capacity. So you're less likely, therefore, to suffer from an injury during your match or during your event. And the final stage, if you went for this one, is the skills practice. And the way that helps performers in their activity is it helps prepare you psychologically, and therefore you're starting to build confidence before your match or before your event. Next question, warming up and checking equipment and facilities before use helps reduce injury in sport. State 2 other ways of reducing injury in adventurous activities such as skiing and snowboarding. The obvious one is probably to talk about protective equipment. So snowboarders and skiers can wear a helmet in order to prevent concussion from a fall. So protective equipment's a good one. And you could also say, I think the second one I would go for here is applying the principles of training effectively. And I'd give the example if they need to account for their individual needs. So if you ski or snowboard on the slopes that are appropriate for your skill level or your ability, you're less likely to become injured. The final question is, give an example of an activity you would do at each stage of a warm-up before playing a team game. So for cardiovascular is the first stage. An example of that could just be a jog around a pitch or a court in order to get your pulse raised a little bit. The second part of a warm-up is stretching. So you could give any example of stretches, such as dynamic stretch, such as high knees, or a static hamstring stretch could be an example. So any example of stretching is fine. And then the third part of the warm-up is the skills practice. You could say in netball, passing is used. In football, shooting is used as a skills practice before taking part in the match or event.